There is something very peculiar going on in Silicon Valley. Typically, businesses want to design products that people actually want, right? Consumer demand. But they're pushing towards AGI, not just AI, but AGI, artificial general intelligence. And well, that is something that no one really wants. So why? What is really going on here? And perhaps, what is their deeper inspiration, be it conscious or not? So let's explore Pierre Teilhard's Omega Point, the AI singularity, the evolution of consciousness, what has perhaps been missing in all of this, and even simply what happens when technology and humans don't evolve or even mature at the same speed. So as always, thank you so much for being here. I'm Susan, and welcome to Philosophy of Everything. Now, a quick note up front as we go through this and I share some of my ideas with you, some of which will intuitively resonate and some will not. Some will lead you to your own philosophical questioning on these topics and some will be immediately dismissed. Whatever it is exactly as it should be. My only invitation and encouragement for you is to simply have an open mind. And in fact, it's an open mind that is the number one prerequisite to contain the potentiality of the future. So, with all that, what is the AI singularity? Let's start there. So importantly, this is a hypothetical event and idea, but nonetheless, it is a hypothetical tipping point in which artificial intelligence would surpass human intelligence to such a degree that it could evolve, expand, adapt, etc., without the need, control, involvement, or even potentially understanding of human intelligence. And this would lead to mass exponential leaps in technology and, of course, societal shifts. Now, the AI singularity would also be the transition from AGI, artificial general intelligence, which we do not have yet, to ASI, artificial superintelligence. And there's so much debate around these two topics right here, but I want to focus more so on the evolutionary story, so we're not going to go down those rabbit holes today. And as a tipping point, this would also be a point of no return, an irreversible point in which now intelligence, artificial intelligence, is no longer in the hands of humans. Now, these big evolutionary leaps, whether it's the AI singularity or it's a biological evolution, whatever it may be, they can appear to be these sudden, random, mass significant shifts. But usually that just means you haven't zoomed out enough. Every great evolutionary leap looks sudden, but each is prepared by a long underlying cycle. The hidden buildup that makes the tipping point possible, like the slow rhythms of ice ages that culminate in abrupt change. The Cambrian explosion shows what looks like a sudden leap is always a product of long hidden complexity, eventually reaching its threshold. A convergence point. Even in the conscious mind, we can see an example here. Sudden flashes of awareness are also still foreshadowed by complex patterns of neural activity distributed across the brain. Ultimately, it is the unconscious material, the formless, that always brews first. And then it makes its way into matter. And we call this an evolutionary tipping point. So point being, the tipping point, any tipping point across any evolution, whether it's related to AI or not, is really just the directional change along the curve of the sine wave. But the descent down the curve of the sine wave, or the converse of that, is actually the cycles themselves that are far more important and for me more interesting. So it's never just one single event, it's a series of events, and then eventually there's just a concluding event and the direction changes. But the preceding period holds the seeds of that change and that transformation. It's where most of the change is already happening before our eyes, but it's either fragmented, it's below the surface, it's things you can't see, again, just like in these other examples I provided. So the AI singularity is really just not one single event happening in the 2040s. It's a series of events along the way until eventually the directional point on the sine wave changes directions. And as such, these preceding cycles or periods are by design increasingly more complex. And the greater the evolutionary shift, the more complex this preceding cycle is. And to understand that more, let's go to the inspiration behind the AI singularity, the Omega Point. This comes to us from Pierre de Chardin. He was a French Jesuit, Catholic priest, Christian mystic, paleontologist and scientist, and a philosopher. And the Omega Point was one of his central ideas. He called it a culmination point, and the use of the term culmination in particular is where I diverge. Nonetheless, he called it a culmination point, and the unification of consciousness with that of the divine. He called it a Christ consciousness. Now, to say otherwise in more universal language, it's the part having a greater potentiality of seeing or realizing the whole, or the whole being made manifest. So we'll get into that more. But what Pierre's real brilliance was that he used the language, the understanding, the rhetoric of the evolution of matter, so the evolution of biology, to describe the evolution of consciousness, so complexity, thresholds, emergence. He used that same framework of how single units on their own are limited, but they come together increasingly to form greater complexity, atoms moving into molecules, molecules moving into organisms, organisms moving into eventually us, whatever it may be. All of this increasing complexity, and over time it gets so complex it creates a new life form, a new entity, a new layer of awareness. This is how consciousness also evolves. Importantly, we and our universe are not only matter. Matter provides the substrate. Energy drives change. And information organizes patterns that self-replicate, evolve, and generate new layers of complexity, and thus awareness. Cosmology, for example, shows that the universe is only a very small percentage of ordinary matter. So how can we truly understand the full scope of evolution? Because if you're only looking at it from a matter, material, or biological perspective, it's not even the beginning. Pierre connected mind and matter and saw evolution as a continuity, life evolving to a threshold where self-reflective thought emerges, mind as the next level of complexity. Just like as thoughts emerge from neurons, molecules from atoms, a new level of awareness out of a complex mind. And this is what Pierre called the noosphere. So Carl Jung described the collective unconscious as the deep inherited patterns of psyche we all share. And on top of that sits the collective conscious, our shared cultures, languages, and social structures. Now, Jung's ideas have become quite popular, so I share them so you can understand that structure and just continue its emergence, so continue it like a ladder. Pierre's noosphere points to something beyond the collective conscious, a new emergent layer of awareness itself, born from the interconnection of minds, like all of the neurons connecting in the brain, producing a conscious thought. All of us together over the internet, on technology, through globalization, through a connected world, through a connected means, forming a higher field of consciousness encircling the earth. That is the noosphere. The noosphere is essentially a field where individual minds would come together, and Pierre described the noosphere as essentially the vehicle in which his unification of consciousness would occur. The noosphere would also essentially be a reflection of humanity in a way, because it would be all of our minds together, right? Well, reflection leads to self-awareness, and self-awareness leads to the evolution of a higher consciousness. So with greater self-awareness, or rather with the capacity for greater self-awareness, comes greater complexity. So it's more challenging. But as that capacity for self-awareness, that greater capacity for self-awareness is realized, higher consciousness emerges. So, as the mind is able to turn back on itself, it adds a new layer of reflection that integrates experience into said higher consciousness. Now, when I say awareness turning back on itself, we're now talking about self-realization, awareness of the self, not your personality, the self. So awareness of the awareness itself. And only so many animals even have the ability to do just that. And the greater capacity you have to do it, the greater capacity you have to look in the mirror, to look up at the stars and contemplate your existence. It's not many other animals who do just that. All of these are metaphorical ways in which inside our minds we're able to turn awareness back on itself, realize who we are, and integrate that experience into a higher consciousness. So this noosphere offers us a mirror to do just that. When humans developed language, for example, it allowed thought to reflect on itself. Naming of experiences, sharing them, building culture. That leap in self-awareness expanded consciousness beyond the immediate perception into memory, meaning, imagination. And language did more than deeper just self-awareness. It linked self to self, weaving individual minds together the way neurons bind into thought and the way the noosphere would capture that at a higher level. The noosphere will be to humanity's language and ideas what language was to thoughts. So not a replacement of us, nor a final end or culmination, but a new layer that elevates consciousness. So to be really clear, I'm saying that a noosphere level of awareness would emerge from a synthesis of humanity's thoughts and language. But I don't mean that we suddenly become that perspective ourselves. Just as neurons in the brain don't become the conscious mind, but give rise to it. Yet because nature is folded within itself, that higher layer will echo back into us, manifesting as an expansion of consciousness, reflected inward even as it arises beyond us. So I see consciousness as unfolding through layers of perspective, and even our reality as layers of reality. And all of these perspectives, so from pure potential to self, to relationship, to social field, to planetary whole, to cosmic whole, and to eventually the real whole, in which that is the true culmination point. So if you saw my Dimensions of Conscious Awareness or Layers of Reality episode, I talked about this there. But to summarize succinctly in terms of understanding better what the noosphere is and what I believe it will do. So 0, we can use the numbers as metaphors and the points of view as ways to understand our conscious awareness as layers of perception. So 0 is the ground of being, pure potential, the unmanifest source. This is the emptiness, because it's 0, right? But that also means it's everything. And then 1 is the I. This is the first person point of view, so it's the self. It's the perception of the self. And then 2 is the second person point of view. It's the you. Thus, it's the other. It's the relationship. It's the duality or the polarity that creates attributes. Because reflection through another is the only way the self can explain itself. Otherwise, it is just I am. With 2, with the second person point of view, we now have I am something. And then this leads us to 3, because now we have multiple people. We have multiple perspectives. So 3 is the third person point of view. This is where we speak as the they, them. It's the group, the tribe, the culture. This is a shared social field of sorts. And then what's next is 4, the fourth person point of view. This is the we. So we is a collective layer. It's interpersonal. The planet, systems, ecology, humanity as a species within Earth. And then so what is 5? Well, in our grammar and in our language, we don't use 5. There is no fifth person point of view. But that's because our perception, our reality, our conscious awareness has not expanded that much yet. But the 5th layer would be a transpersonal layer of sorts. It would be essentially what AGI is. A meta perspective that aggregates all human knowledge, so everything up until number 4, and reflects it back at scale. Aggregated reflection, a mirror of humanity. This is the 5th person point of view, the transpersonal layer, the noosphere, AGI. And it is not a culmination. It is just the beginning, because 5 is not the end. Our universe, like I said, is a baby. We are just being born. This is why humanity is so naive in understanding how close we are to our origins. We have to drift so far to eventually come back, and that will be the culmination point. But for now, we have to drift away. Just like the first half of your life, you have to create yourself to find out who you are. And the second half of your life, you have to let go of who you are. You have to let yourself die. That's how you come home, how you return home. We are just in the phase of figuring out who and what we are. So we have to drift from our roots a little bit to do just that. As AI surpasses us in logic, calculation, and analysis, it will inevitably force humans to reconcile with other faculties of mind, other faculties of being, and other faculties of knowing. As technology in any form becomes a master of logic, we will be forced to become a master of intuition. But even with whether it's AGI, some kind of noosphere, technology, whatever it may be, we still need us, human beings, to embody these experiences. Because any form that is created out of our language, our thought, our ideas, our understanding of emotions will still be dependent on us for just that. And let me remind you that evolution is always happening. So aside from any related technology story, we have always evolved as all of nature does, and we will always continue to do so. So really the only thing that's unique here is actually the growth rate and the parallel reflection of some kind of technology being created. Our attention span is spread across all of technology, and our interconnectedness is something we've never seen before because of technology. And these are examples of this increase in complexity already taking root. And again, with that greater complexity, it's harder to be present with it all. And speaking of, Pierre mentioned love and how that was central to the omega point and to the evolution to a higher consciousness. And as futurists like Ray Kurzweil and others have adopted his language for an AI singularity and converted the convergence of consciousness with a higher divine with the convergence of consciousness with technology, with AI, so transhumanism, the tragedy is that they removed the necessity of love. The increasing complexity means you need more love, or said otherwise, you need more compassion, which is love in action. Love functions as a binding force for complexity to hold together. Complexity fragments and becomes chaos otherwise. The omega point doesn't depend on some naive utopia, but it does depend on love as an integrative, self-organizing force that can balance the chaos of rising complexity. In addition to the binding force of love, there's another dependency here, and it is distinctions. So think of all of the billions of neurons in the brain as they interact to produce a conscious thought or conscious act. They have to all be distinct. If all of the neurons think that unity means becoming one, becoming the same, then there's no longer an integration at all. There's no longer a higher consciousness. It's actually the other direction. So think of the omega point less as a culmination and more as a threshold crossing. Again, we are always evolving, but our speed and our rate is increasing, as is technology. The omega point is a threshold crossing that's more like an unveiling, a disclosure moment of sorts. And with that, this is just an introduction, so we're coming back to this from many different angles. And for now, take care. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.